Hello everyone, this is Yana Smakula. Welcome back to my channel. You are watching a card making tutorial for the Spellbinders 12 Days of Stitchmas Advent Calendar, and this is day 5. I also have project tutorials for day 1 and day 3 if you missed those, and you can also find little unboxing shorts on my channel for each of the 12 days of this Advent calendar. Now, I first wanted to show you what elements this die cuts and show you the size of these die cuts as well. I have my Platinum 6 die cutting and embossing machine, and I'm first going to cut the shadow piece from the Spellbinders Glacier cardstock. Now, this creates a beautiful backer piece to hold the snowflake. Next, I'm die cutting the snowflake from the Spellbinders Snowdrift cardstock, and this gives me several pieces. First of all, I have this beautiful negative piece. You can use this, first of all, as a guide when putting the snowflake together. You can use it as a stencil or even as a standalone piece to create shaker cards. Imagine filling this open space with some pretty sequins. Wouldn't that be fun? I think that is a great idea to try. Next, we have the central snowflake piece and the little ends of the snowflake. So the snowflake itself is not just one piece, it consists of several pieces. And this is done to give you more options, to give you the ability to combine different colors of cardstock, for example. Now, whenever I create with stitching dies, I like to double the die cuts up. So I cut the stitching elements twice, and I adhere the die cuts together to have one sturdy piece. This gives me much sturdier die cuts that hold the stitching a lot better. Now, I like to use Barely Art glue. You can shop this glue in the Spellbinders shop, and I like to glue the elements together. Now, I'm adding glue to the back of the die cut, and I'm making sure to avoid adding the glue over the open die cut holes. With that done, I'm sticking the two die cuts together and then going to put a few clear blocks over this piece to let the glue dry, and then we'll adhere the rest of the pieces in the same way. It does take an extra minute to do this, but I find I get much better results this way. Now, whenever I do stitching, I love to use ombre thread. It just adds more interest to my projects. It is just more fun to use. Now, this particular color is included in the Stitch Along kit. This is thread number 67. I also have my DMC tapestry needles in size 22, and these have a blunt end to them, so you won't pierce your skin as you're stitching, or your paper for that matter. Now, I like to cut a good chunk of thread and then separate it. Now, this thread has 6 strands, and I never stitch with all 6 unless I'm doing some sort of creative embroidery. Then I will use the 6 strands. But when I do basic stitches, like the stitches that I'm about to do, I just use 2 strands, sometimes 3, but most of the time just 2. Now, I did cut my thread a little bit too long here, but I was able to manage just fine. Generally, it is better to cut your thread a little shorter so that it doesn't get too long and it doesn't get tangled as you are stitching. Now, I like to start stitching in the center, and I make sure to either leave enough thread to be able to tie it into a knot, or use best ever craft tape, or you can use any other low-tech tape that you might have in your stash to hold the tape from the back just to make sure that it stays put. Either way works just fine. Sometimes there isn't enough room on the back of my die cuts, like the little snowflake pieces. There isn't really enough room to add the tape. In that case, I tie my thread into a knot, or actually a double knot or even a triple knot. Now, this snowflake is designed to be stitched using 2 colors of thread. You'll see that there is a bigger opening in the center, and you radiate some of your stitches from there. And then there are other smaller holes around the large central opening. And you can either use 1 color thread to stitch the entire snowflake, or do every other stitch with 1 color of thread to have a 2-tone look. I've zoomed in for you so you can see the process up close. As I'm stitching, I'm making sure that there is tension to my thread. I'm always holding my thread with my fingers to make sure I pull it nice and tight. Not too tight so that it bends my die cut, but tight so that the thread lays tight on my on my die cut, so that there's no sagging. That's one way to go about it. The other way, like I said, is to do every other stitch in one color of thread, and that's what I'm going to do for this die cut. I'm going to combine this color thread with a silver metallic thread from DMC. And again, the silver metallic thread is a part of the Stitch Along kit. I've sped up the stitching quite a bit. You know, you don't want to see me stitch all of these pieces because it's all very repetitive. But I wanted to show you, yet another option. You can continue your stitches like this to have a different look on your snowflake. So even though there are lines marked on your die cut that tell you where the stitches need to go, that doesn't mean that you can't get creative. It doesn't mean that you can't stitch this piece or any other piece in your own way. If you feel like adding more stitches, or if you feel like skipping some stitches, go ahead and do that. Make it your own. Okay, I'm going to secure the end of this thread from the back using tape and cut the thread using my scissors. Next, I'm using the silver metallic thread, and like I said, it is included in the Stitch Along kit, and I'm using it to stitch the rest of the stitches on this snowflake. I think the light blue and the silver are going to look very beautiful together. Overall, it is a beautiful holiday combination, a wintry combination. Again, I'm using my tape to secure this thread from the back of my snowflake before I start stitching. I'm using just one strand of this floss, so I'm not doubling it up. And again, I'm making sure there is tension to the thread when I'm doing my stitches. With the stitching done, I'm taping the end of the thread from the back using that same Best Ever Craft tape. And this is, by the way, the narrow version of this tape. I love to use it whenever I do stitching because it's narrow and I can get this tape into these smaller areas on my die cuts. I have already stitched a snowflake, and I have it here to show you the two options side by side. So this one that's already finished features just single thread stitching. I just used the ombre blue thread and I skipped the silver, and I used the same ombre thread for the little parts of the snowflake, and I've also already assembled it. So I used foam adhesive squares and I foam mounted it onto the light blue that is, again, glacier background. For the other snowflake, I do like the combination of the silver and the light blue ombre thread, and that's what I'm going to do. Now, the little pieces, the little ends of the snowflake, they're very, very small, and I find it a little bit difficult to hold them with my fingers. So what I like to do is I like to use tweezers. They're super handy. They have become my best friend when it comes to stitching because, well, first of all, I can use the tweezers to hold my tiny die cut in place, but I can also use the tweezers to hold the end of my thread in place. So I no longer need to use my fingers to do that. Tweezers hold the thread and the die cut nicely in place, and I can just focus on my stitching. And once I'm done, I remove the tweezers, I reposition them, and then the tweezers add extra weight to my die cut when I'm tying the knot because the die cut itself is very lightweight. It can easily move around and fly around my desk. The tweezers are adding a little bit of weight to this piece, so they're holding the die cut down, they're weighing it down, and this allows me to easily tie a knot. Once I do that, I have actually tied 2 knots here. I like to add a dot of glue just to make sure that the knot is going to stay extra secure. As I was stitching this snowflake, I realized that I did not quite like how dark the ombre blue thread was. So I used my scissors and I removed that light blue stitching. I do this a lot. If I'm not happy with my stitching, I will go back, I will cut the thread up, and I will redo it. So here I have a part of the thread with a lighter blue color. And you can absolutely do this. If you have ombre thread and you like a particular part of that thread better than the other part, you can just cut a section of the thread that you like here, like I'm doing here. So I like that lighter blue section. So that's what I'm using here, just because I want a lighter blue snowflake. So I restitched it. And now I'm ready to put my snowflake together. I've added double-sided foam squares from the back of my snowflake. Now, whenever I do stitching, I like to use foam adhesive squares to pop my elements up. Thread does add a little bit of dimension from the back of your die cut. You can use glue, and I do use glue sometimes, but I feel like using foam adhesive squares is just a little bit of a better option. It gives me a bit of a cushion, and overall, I just like to use a lot of foam adhesive. That's just how I craft. That's just how I make cards. My cards are usually dimensional, so even when I do stitching, I use a lot of foam adhesive. So it took me a minute to adhere the main element in the center of my backer piece. And with that done, I'm going to position my template over the central piece to help me align and adhere the little ends of the snowflake. I'm going to add them in one by one, and I do remove the template just to be sure, to double check if I did align everything perfectly, and I did. And now I can just easily pop each of the die cuts in place and adhere them on my backer piece. This makes it a lot easier to position everything. You don't have to use this template, but I did try it with and without the template, and I do like using the template when I'm adhering these pieces. And you already have the template. It's not like you have to die cut another piece, because you do end up having this template when you die cut the main snowflake out. And look at this, our little snowflake is ready, and I absolutely love this look. I love the combination of the silver with the blue, although the regular blue, the all blue, looks just as beautiful. Now I also have another snowflake. Now this is completely reverse. Now I use the glacier cardstock for the snowflake itself and the snowdrift, the white cardstock, for the backer. My stitching was done using just the DMC thread, and I love this look. So you have a lot of options. There's a lot you can do. You can try and experiment with different colors of thread, with different colors of cardstock to create different looking snowflakes for your cards. Moving on, and let's go ahead and create a card. Here I have a card base. This is an A2 side folding card base, and I'm going to use the Spellbinders Essential Arches die to die cut a shaped card base for my snowflake. I feel like the arch shape goes really well with the snowflake because both of these have, a circle to them. The snowflake is essentially a circle, and then the arch is a semicircle. So these go really well together. Now, in order to create a shaped card base, you want to make sure to position your card base where you have the fold so that the fold does not go over the cut line. Here, the side where I've added best ever craft tape, the yellow tape, that's where the fold is. And I've zoomed in real close, and you can see that this side is not going over the cut line. It is touching the cut line, but it is just a hair away from the cut line. And that is going to ensure that the cut line is not going to cut through the fold of my card. This will allow me to keep my card base, but it will cut all the other sides. It will cut the arched shape, and it will cut the other two sides, allowing me to create that arched card base. I love to do this. I love to use this die set to create a shaped card base. And you can use any other die set in the same way to create a shaped card base for your card. So as I remove the negative piece, you can see that I'm left with a beautiful card base in a form of an arch. Now, I did not use the largest arch in this shape. I actually like to use the second largest one, just because it makes it a little bit easier to align and position this die on my panel, on my card base. You can definitely use the largest one if you want. I don't mind cutting, a little bit of the cardstock off to have a smaller base. Next, I have a panel cut using that same die, and this is cut from the Spellbinders brushed white cardstock. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to foil a simple sentiment at the bottom of my panel. The sentiment comes from the A Merry Little Christmas Sentiments Glimmer Hot Foil Plate and Die set. I'm just using the simple sentiment here, and I went ahead and I cut a piece of matte silver foil. I used my quick trimmer. This is the specialty trimmer by Spellbinders, designed to help you cut foil on a straight edge. I'm using my hinge method, and I've taped the glimmer plate onto my panel. I am positioning it in the lower center of the panel. I've added my tape. I taped it using another piece of low-tack tape, and I'm going to place it onto my glimmer hot foil system. My glimmer has been heating off to the side, so it is now ready to go. I've pressed the timer button, and I'm just going to follow the instructions to foil this beautiful piece onto my panel. Now, if you are new to hot foiling and to the Glimmer hot foil system, Spellbinders has a fantastic Glimmer bootcamp on the Spellbinders YouTube channel, and I encourage you to check it out. It is filled with lots of useful information, and it will help you become a pro when it comes to hot foil stamping. So I'm just going to wait for the light to stop flashing and to turn solid green. And once it turns solid greens, it means my plate is hot enough and ready to foil. I'm going to take that out of my docking station and send it through my Platinum 6 die cutting and embossing machine to apply pressure and transfer the foil onto my panel. And let's take a look at this. Beautiful. It is almost perfect. I do have a little bit of overfoiling on the edges. I should have cut my foil, to size. I didn't quite do that. So that's why I have the overfoiling here, but I can easily take care of that and erase that using a sanding eraser. Now, my plan is to add the snowflake above the sentiment. We're going for a very clean and simple card here. And I also want to add a sentiment across the snowflake. Now, I have two sentiment options, and I foiled one in opaque white foil and also one in matte silver. I wasn't sure which one I liked best, but I think I like the opaque white a little bit better just because it shows a little bit better on this red cardstock. So I foiled it in that foil and I cut it out using a banner die. Now that we have everything ready, it's time to assemble our card. I've already added foam adhesive squares. These are the thin foam adhesive squares to the back of my snowflake, and I'm just going to position it onto my background. I'm going to make sure it is nice and centered, and I'm going to foam mount it onto my card base. And then using foam adhesive squares once again to foam mount my sentiment, and I absolutely love this clean and simple look. Now, I did add a couple of gems to complete this card. I went with the Spellbinders silver gems and I added them onto the ends of my snowflake, and I just love that subtle sparkle that I have going on this project. Love it. Okay, I have one more card idea for you, so let's jump right in. For my second card, I wanted to show you a different way to use the snowflake. I wanted to find a way to extend the snowflake and make it bigger. So what I did here is I die cut a bunch of elements, a bunch of snowflakes. I added 3 additional layers of the little snowflake ends. And I've positioned them in a different way to create a very large and unique snowflake. The size of this panel that's an A2 panel, so it measures 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And you can see how by adding these extra pieces, I've enlarged the snowflake and made it really bigger for my card. So if you want to create a larger snowflake, you can easily do this. You can die cut extra pieces, you can stitch them or skip stitching if you want, and create a bigger snowflake for a bigger card. Now, I did a different kind of stitching this time. I used a blue ombre thread and I combined it with the gold DMC metallic thread. Both are included in your stitch along kit. And here I created a smaller card base. So this is a square card base and it is 4¼ inches square. I've cut a panel of white cardstock just slightly smaller and I foam mounted that cardstock panel onto my card base. I used a layer of foam adhesive to pop it up. I'm then using foam adhesive squares to foam mount my main snowflake element. So I did use the backer piece here and I adhered the stitching onto that backer. So I did everything that I did for my card number 1. I'm not showing you the process how I did it because it's very repetitive. I basically did the same thing just in a different color of thread. But I also stitched additional pieces. Now, I'm adding my sentiment. This time I foiled it in matte gold foil because I do have the gold thread stitching on the snowflake, so I felt it was appropriate to use the matte gold foil for the sentiment. And once I have that, I'm going to add the extra snowflake pieces to extend this snowflake and create a bigger one. I did plan at first to add 2 extra rows of the snowflake ends, but I ended up adding just one, the one stitched in the gold thread, just because it made better sense for this particular card size and just because it looked better. I still think that the first snowflake looks a lot better with the subtle blue stitching. This dark blue, I feel like it's a little bit too dark, but I wanted to show you options. I wanted to show you different ways that you can use this die. With all of the elements adhered onto my card base, I used these Spellbinders Fashion Gold dots to embellish my snowflake. I added a couple of dots onto the ends of the snowflake and also onto the background to fill it in. And here we have a super simple stitched snowflake card. I hope you like it. So here's a look at the 2 cards side by side. You can see how the second snowflake, how much bigger the second snowflake is. So I hope this gives you some ideas and inspiration on how you can use your snowflake stitching die from the 12 Days of Stitchmas calendar from Spellbinders.